When you first started researching this book and when you first were aware of this issue, what was the difference between your initial perception versus what you found?
So going in, I was expecting to see some child labor, poor working conditions, and probably some poor environmental practices. And that first trip hit me like a thunderclap. And I've seen a lot, okay? I mean, I've done research in more than 50 countries in the grit and the grime and the misery and the underbelly of humanity. And it hit me like a thunderclap because the scale was beyond anything I would have imagined. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of children, caked in toxic grime and filth, digging this vital mineral out of the ground in medieval conditions. It's like going back in time. You know, you imagine what mining was like 300 or 400 years ago, or the early days of coal mining. You know, it's that bad and worse because we're supposed to be living in this enlightened era. So the scale of it shocked me. The severity shocked me. To see kids up to their shoulders caked in this filth and grime and toxic. I mean, to see teenagers walking around with babies on their back, all inhaling this toxic cobalt dust. To see them barely scraping by on $1 a day, $2 a day. And then as I interviewed these workers, I use the term worker. They're not workers at all. They're oppressed, degraded slaves. As I interviewed them, the level of injury, broken legs, shattered spines, toxic contamination, cancers, birth defects, what's happening to the people there. And then the most heart-wrenching thing of all, there's probably 10 to 15,000 tunnels. I think I even sent you guys one or two videos of what these tunnels look like. The artisanal miners will dig tunnels 30, 40 meters down to get to some of the higher grade deposits. And they don't have supports, rock bolts, ventilation shafts, anything like that. And those tunnels collapse. Every week in the Congo, a tunnel collapses. And everyone who's down there, 30, 40, 50 men and boys meaning kids, are buried alive. And when I started hearing those stories, and I heard them on my first trip, it just ripped me apart because I thought, this is the bottom of trillion-dollar supply chains? When I plug in my smartphone, I don't have an electric car, but if I did, when I plug that in, I'm plugging in that level of suffering and death. I mean, I can't imagine a more horrid way of dying than being buried alive. And they're down there trying to get that $1 or $2 because that's the difference between eating and surviving and not. And that's what I wasn't anticipating, just the level of severity. And if your listeners are familiar with, you know, what it was like in colonial Africa and in the Congo during the Belgian times, I mean, I thought I was back in King Leopold's regime, where there's just utter disregard for the humanity of the people in the Congo. All that matters is the loot. All that matters is the loot, the resource. Get it out, make money, and to hell with the population, to hell with the people there. They're either a efficient slave labor force or they're just in the way. But there's loot in the dirt, and we need that loot. And that's the dynamic down there.